Hello, class. I am going to give a last lecture here on the end of the Odyssey, and we're going to cover books 21 through 24. I don't think this will take a very long time because normally when I give lectures, I like to ask questions and get answers from y'all, but since it's a one-sided affair tonight, I think we'll go much shorter, so maybe about 20 to 30 minutes, so make sure that you listen to it all. This will help you also as you get ready for your test next week. So we start with book 21, which is Odysseus strings his bow. And the stage had been set at the end of book 20, where Penelope had laid out a challenge for the suitors and how they could win her hand. And in book 21, the men are getting ready for dinner. And this is the explanation of how one can win Penelope's hand. So on page 426, beginning at line 84, says, "Here is the prize at issue, right before you. Look, I set before you the great bow of King Odysseus. Now, the hand that can string this bow with greatest ease, that shoots an arrow clean through all 12 axes, he is the man I follow, yes, forsaking this house where I was once a bride, this gracious house, so filled with the best that life can offer. I shall always remember it, that I know, even in my dreams." So Penelope is finally going to end the game. She's been playing a game with these suitors for a long time. We remember the shroud, the burial shroud for Laertes. She's been leading them on, playing a game, and now she's finally going to end the game, give them a chance to win her hand. But it's not necessarily going to be easy. It might sound easy to be able to string Odysseus's bow and shoot through 12 axes, but as we come to find out, it's actually a very difficult thing to do. And so you kind of wonder in a situation like this where you have about 100 suitors, who is going to be the first to try their hand? You might think that Antinous or Eurymachus, one of those, would want to do it. They would want to be first. They would not want to be outclassed. But they're pretty wily and shrewd. And so on page 429, Antinous urges for others to go ahead and go first. And the first man up is Leodes, Enops' son. And it says that he is a seer who could see their futures in the smoke, who always sat by the glowing wine bowl, well back, the one man in the group who loathed their reckless ways, appalled by their outrage. So Leodes is one of the suitors, but he doesn't like the way that the other suitors operate. He can't stand Antinous. He can't stand Eurymachus. He doesn't like their reckless ways, so he hangs back in the shadows. Nonetheless, he is one of the suitors, and so he will fall under Athena's judgment. Going on, it says, his turn first. Picking up the weapon now, and the swift arrow, he stood at the threshold, poised to try the bow, but failed to bend it. As soon as he tugged the string, his hands went slack, his soft, uncalloused hands. And he called back to the suitors, "Friends, I can't bend it. Take it, someone, try. Here is a bow to rob our best of life and breath, all our best contenders." There's some significant foreshadowing. Remember, Leodes is a seer, and he ends up saying something true about the future, even though he doesn't know it. He says, here is a bow to rob our best of life and breath, all our best contenders. And if you think later, because you've read the end, and you know what happens, Odysseus uses that bow to kill quite a few of the suitors, beginning with Antinous. Okay, so it doesn't go well for Leodes. And so you get some others who fail as well, and you come to see that they try to do a little bit of engineering on the bow. They figure, well, we're going to need some help. And so they end up trying to rub it with hot oil. It says, get some lard from the stores inside so we young lords can heat and limber the bow and rub it down with grease before we try again and finish off the contest. So they're going to try to do a little bit of engineering. They're going to try to make it a little easier on themselves. And so it says, this is on page 130. The goatherd bustled about to rake the fire, still going strong. He pulled up a big stool, heaped it with fleece, and fetched the hefty ball of lard from the stores inside. And the young men limbered the bow, rubbing it down with hot grease, then struggled to bend it back, but failed. No use. They fell far short of the strength the bow required. Antinous still held off, Dashing Eurymachus too, the ringleaders of all the suitors, head and shoulders the strongest of the lot. So they're the strongest, but they're hanging back. They're letting others kind of work it up first, limber it up a little bit. It's kind of like when somebody tries to get the lid off a pickle jar, and they can't do it, and they're straining at it, and then you come along and you pop it off easily because they did all the work. That's what Antinous and Eurymachus want to do. They want the others to do all the hard work so that when it's their turn, they can string the bow pretty easily. Okay. Now, as this is going on, Odysseus, who's still disguised as a beggar, leads Eumaeus, the swineherd, and Felicius, the cowherd, outside to have a conversation with them. Okay, and so this is continuing on page 430, and he says to them, "Cowherd, swineherd, what, shall I blurt this out or keep it to myself?" "No, speak out. The heart inside me says so. How far would you go to fight beside Odysseus? Say he dropped like that from a clear blue sky, and a god brought him back. Would you fight for the suitors or your king? Tell me how you feel inside your hearts." So he's testing their loyalty. "Father Zeus," the trusty cowherd shouted, "bring my prayer to pass. Let the master come. Some god guide him now. You'd see my power, my fighting arms in action." Eumaeus echoed his prayer to all the gods that their wise king would soon come home again. Certain at least these two were loyal to the death, Odysseus reassured them quickly. "I'm right here in the flesh, myself, and home at last, after bearing 20 years of brutal hardship." And I won't read the rest, but he shows the scar from the boar, and that convinces them, and they throw themselves around him, they kiss him, and they are the faithful ones. And Odysseus knows that they will be faithful, and so now Odysseus has finally been revealed to everybody but Penelope. Well, and he hasn't revealed himself to the suitors just yet. But now he has Eumaeus and Felicius on his side. And we get to the end of... we get more of the suitors trying and failing to string the bow. And then Odysseus, described as the beggar, asks if he can go ahead and try to string the bow just for laughs, just for kicks. Let an old beggar try it. And they don't like that idea very much. They don't think that that's a good idea. But he goes ahead and he picks it up. And it's interesting, on page 437, it shows the suitors' thoughts or their comments, the things they're saying. And one of them says, "Look how he twists and turns it in his hands," as he's twisting and turning the bow in his hands. And of course, Odysseus is the man of twists and turns. That person speaks truly, even though he doesn't realize that that's Odysseus in front of him. And so he's able to string the bow. I won't read the whole thing, but at the very end, it says, "He paused with a warning nod, and at that sign, Prince Telemachus, son of King Odysseus, girding his sharp sword on, clamping hand to spear, took his stand by a chair that flanked his father, his bronze spear point glinting now like fire." And so that sets the stage for the big climactic battle. And Odysseus hasn't yet revealed himself to his suitors, but he has shot through the axes, which does give him the right to Penelope's hand, even though nobody would ever actually let him have it. And so that brings us to book 22, Slaughter in the Hall, which is a lot of foreshadowing in one title. And so he shot through the axes, and he's holding the bow, and then he does something that we might think a little bit unexpected, or at the very least, none of the suitors seem to expect it. The first one that he shoots at is Antinous, and the suitors don't figure that he would shoot at anybody. After all, he's just one guy. And if he did kill somebody, they would all quickly dispatch him. But on page 439, it says, with that, he trained a stabbing arrow on Antinous, just lifting a gorgeous golden loving cup in his hands, just tilting the two-handled goblet back to his lips, and about to drain the wine and slaughter the last thing on the suitor's mind. Who could dream that one foe in that crowd of feasters, however great his power, would bring down death on himself and black doom? But Odysseus aimed and shot Antinous square in the throat, and the point went stabbing clean through the soft neck and out. And off to the side he pitched. The cup dropped from his grasp as the shaft sank home, and the man's lifeblood came spurting from his nostrils, thick red jets. A sudden thrust of his foot, he kicked away the table. Food showered across the floor, and the bread and the meat soaked in a swirl of bloody filth. Pretty vivid and pretty descriptive, and that's not going to be the last of the vivid and descriptive deaths in this chapter for sure. And all the suitors are in an uproar. They can't believe that the beggar would actually kill the best among them. But that's what he did. And so this is when Odysseus finally reveals himself, okay? And so this is at the bottom of 440. After they threaten him, Odysseus shouts back, "You dogs! You never imagined I'd return from Troy, so cocksure that you bled my house to death, ravished my serving women, wooed my wife behind my back while I was still alive. No fear the gods who rule the skies up there. No fear that men's revenge might arrive someday. Now all your necks are in the noose. Your doom is sealed." And they pretty quickly realize this is actually Odysseus. And even though they're greatly outnumbered, they are afraid. And so they do what you might expect them to do. They quickly blame the dead guy, Antinous, he can't argue for himself. So they blame him. Eurymachus says, let me find it. Yeah, Eurymachus says, but here he lies, quite dead, and he incited it all. Antinous, look, the man who drove us all to crime. So Eurymachus says, it's Antinous' fault. He's the one who drove us to it. We'll pay you back, but he's the one that did it, and so none of us should be killed over this. Well, Odysseus will have none of that. On 441, but the battle master kept on glaring, seething. No, Eurymachus, not if you paid me all your father's wealth, all you possess now, and all that could pour in from the world's end. No, not even then would I stay my hands from slaughter till all you suitors had paid for your crimes. And two things I want to note about this. One, this is also Athena's wishes. She's the one that's judged that all the suitors must die. But also Odysseus sounds a little bit like Achilles here, because if you remember, when Achilles comes back to the battle, there's a guy who tries to beg him for his life and to be paid for a ransom. And Achilles says, nope, maybe before, but not now, not for all the world. And so Odysseus will not in any way settle for a truce. He won't let them pay him back. And so Eurymachus realizes, okay, well, we're going to have to fight. So he calls all the men to his side and says, we're going to have to fight this out. Now, remember, there's a lot of them. And it seems like they have the odds, except Odysseus has a goddess on his side who is going to be a lot of help. Now, Eurymachus and Amphinomus die pretty quickly. Eurymachus is killed by Odysseus. Amphinomus, who is the best of the suitors, really, the one that we most like, the one that we kind of don't want to die, he's killed by Telemachus. As Amphinomus goes after Odysseus, Telemachus is the one that actually takes his life. And so, remember Leodes, he's the first one who tries to string the bow, and he can't. He grabs Odysseus's knees, and he begs for mercy, but he's not able to talk him out of it, and Odysseus kills him. Now, the tide seems to turn a little bit in the battle, because Melanthius, who is the goat herd, and who's on the suitor's side, is able to find the weapons and start distributing them. Remember that Odysseus and Telemachus had hidden the weapons, and now Melanthius is able to throw some of the weapons down. But Eumaeus and Telemachus, or maybe it's Eumaeus and Phalecius, are able to find Melanthius, and they string him up, and they save him for later. And so that threat is kind of averted. Anyway, the battle goes, and all the suitors are killed. Now, Odysseus does not kill indiscriminately. He doesn't kill Phemius, the bard, and he doesn't kill Medon, the herald. Telemachus vouches for them both, that they were not in league with the suitors. They were forced against their will to do their tasks. And so Odysseus doesn't kill them. But all the suitors die. All of the unfaithful women servants die. And actually, they have it really bad. They have to carry out the dead bodies. They have to help clean the house. And then they're strung up by the neck and they're killed. Melanthius is also killed in a pretty gruesome way. And the thing that I want to point out about this, the violence of the scene tends to bother people. Why is it so bloody? Why were the serving women killed? It's important to note that Odysseus's house has been in disorder. And by cleansing it through violence and then cleansing it by actually cleaning it, he puts his house in order. And he reestablishes himself as the rightful king of his house by killing all the suitors and then cleaning away their blood. And so it truly is a slaughter in the hall. And that's what ends book 22. Book 23, I'm not going to say a whole lot about. It's where Odysseus is very coy in revealing himself to his wife. And his wife doesn't actually believe him right away when he does reveal himself. And so she puts him to the test. And she says, well, we'll just have to move. She says, Eurycleia, move the sturdy bedstead out of our bridal chamber, that room the master built with his own hands. Take it now, sturdy bed that it is, and spread it deep with fleece, blankets and lustrous throws to keep our guest warm. Okay, that's her putting him to the test, putting Odysseus to the test. And Odysseus basically passes the test because he's the only one, other than maybe a couple of serving girls, he's the only one who knows that the great carved bed can't be moved. He says, not a man on earth, not even at peak strength, would find it easy to prise it up and shift it. No. A great sign, a hallmark, lies in its construction. I know, I built it myself, no one else. And he tells the story about how it basically grew around a tree. And so it's an immovable bed, and he's the only one that knows that. And then she knows, okay, this really is my husband, and he is back, and this is living proof. Okay? And that takes us to book 24, which is called Peace. And if you remember the structure of the Iliad, in book 22, you have the climactic battle between Achilles and Hector. And then in book 23, you have kind of an anticlimactic chapter, the funeral games for Patroclus. And then in book 24, you have something of a climax where Priam goes and asks for the body. Well, you have a similar thing here. Book 22 is the slaughter in the hall. It's the climactic battle. Book 23 is anticlimactic in that it's the revelation of Odysseus to Penelope. And book 24 is a little bit of another climax where you have the families of the suitors who come after Odysseus out at Laertes' house. But the book itself opens in an interesting place. It opens in the house of the dead. And this creates kind of an envelope structure in the epic, because in book 1, at the very beginning, the story opens in Mount Olympus, in the Council of the Gods. Here at book 24, it opens in the house of the dead, the furthest that you can get from the Council of the Gods. And it's where the suitors are being ushered, they're being escorted by Hermes down to the kingdom of the dead, and they're weeping and they're groaning. And we saw from Odysseus' visit to the kingdom of the dead some of the other Greek warriors. Well, we see them again. Agamemnon is talking with Achilles, and he's talking about how great it must be to be Achilles, to be remembered in glory on earth, whereas Agamemnon died an ignoble death caused by his own wife and her lover. So as far as deaths go and being remembered in death, it's much better to be Achilles than to be Agamemnon. And as they're talking about this, the suitors enter into the house of the dead, and they tell the story of what happened to them. And Agamemnon hears the story, and he says, let me find it. Agamemnon's ghost cried out, "Happy Odysseus, son of old Laertes, mastermind! What a fine, faithful wife you won! What good sense resided in your Penelope! How well Icarius' daughter remembered you, Odysseus, the man she married once. The fame of her great virtue will never die. The immortal gods will lift a song for all mankind, a glorious song in praise of self-possessed Penelope." which he contrasts with his own faithless wife, Clytemnestra. And so then we leave that scene and we kind of return to the overworld and Odysseus talking about what needs to happen next. Now, if you remember, earlier in the book, Odysseus was told, I think this was in the Kingdom of the Dead, that after he cleansed his house, he would still have another adventure that he would have to take. And in this adventure, he would have to go far, far away to where the inhabitants of a land, when they saw his oar or his paddle, would think that it's something that you use for rice or grain, which would mean they're so far away from the sea, so far away from the wine dark sea, they don't even know what an oar is. They don't even know that that's what you would use it for. And then he would know that he's there, he's got to make a sacrifice to Poseidon, and then he can come back. So there's another adventure that awaits him. But first he has to try to figure out what to do about these suitors and their families. He goes out to his father's place. Remember, his father's name is Laertes. And when he sees his father, he recognizes him as being old and broken down. So on page 475, it says, "Long enduring Odysseus, catching sight of him now, a man worn down with years, his heart racked with sorrow, halted under a branching pear tree, paused and wept, debating head and heart, what should he do now? Kiss and embrace his father, pour out the long tale, how he had made the journey home to native land, or probe him first and test him every way. Torn, mulling it over, this seemed better. Test the old man first. Reproach him with words that cut him to the core." And so Odysseus puts his own father to the test, I guess to see if he's loyal. It's never quite made sense to me why he would test his own father who's been grieving for him this whole time. But he wants to see if his father is loyal. Maybe to make sure that his father would not sell him out when the family of the suitors come looking for Odysseus. And he finds that his father is faithful. In fact, Telemachus is there. And as they talk about how they're going to fight the suitors, both Odysseus and Telemachus are going back and forth about who's going to show the greater valor. And Laertes, all of a sudden, his spirits are really high, and Athena showers him with glory, and he loves hearing his son and his grandson going back and forth about who's going to be braver. And so, he's getting ready he wants to be able to fight. Let me see if I can find the part of Laertes' joy. This is on page 484. Laertes called out in deep delight, "What a day for me, dear gods! What joy! My son and my grandson vying over courage." Okay? And now the families of the suitors come. Eupeithes, who is Antinous' father, comes. And it's Laertes who hurls the spear that kills Eupeithes. It's the old man who does it. And then right after that, you think you're going to have this great big battle again. It says, Athena cries out in a piercing voice that stopped all fighters cold. "Hold back, you men of Ithaca, back from brutal war. Break off, shed no more blood. Make peace at once." So Athena commands peace. She commands peace between the two sides. And that's it. It's kind of an anticlimactic ending. It's really surprising. We think we're going to get a battle, and instead she commands peace, and that's it. It's over. It comes to an abrupt end on page 45. We know that after this, Odysseus is going to have to make another adventure, even though he doesn't really want to. He's really wanting to just stay home. All he's wanted is to get back home, and he wants to stay home. He's not going to want to do this other adventure. Odysseus is made out in later literature to be somebody who is lustful for adventure and for travel. And in Lord Alfred Tennyson's poem, Ulysses, he talks about, from Ulysses' point of view, Ulysses is Odysseus' Roman name. When we read the Aeneid, he will come up again, but his name is Ulysses. And in the poem Ulysses, he's seeking just one more adventure. How great it would be to get back out there and do it all again. And in Dante's Inferno, Ulysses is in hell because He's a false counselor. He had falsely recruited his men to go on one more adventure, and they all die at sea. But the Odysseus that we get in the Odyssey is one who would really just rather be home, who's sick of adventures, who doesn't want to go on another one, but is going to have to. And so that concludes our study of the Odyssey. You've now read 2 epics by Homer. We're going to begin the Aeneid by Virgil soon. A lot of people like the Odyssey more than the Iliad because it's a little tighter in its structure, and Odysseus is somebody that you're kind of rooting for to be able to get back home and pay back the suitors, whereas you're a bit ambivalent who to root for in the Iliad. Can't identify with Achilles very well. And so that's it for that. Good luck studying for your test. I'm sure we can talk more about the Odyssey after the test next week if you have any lingering questions or thoughts or things that you would like clarified. Don't forget to study for the test next week, and also your paper is due the morning of class. See ya.